A year and a half ago, in November, I made a video explaining why you should play Halo Combat Evolved. I told myself I'd stick to analyzing the first mission and revealing just how well it shows the player what to do, while also giving them a reason to do so. By using clever dialogue, they successfully introduce players to the universe without expositing lore for 20 minutes. I ended up not sticking exclusively to the first mission because, much like Tibet, I have trouble defining boundaries. But technically, on May 12th of 2020, Halo 2 Anniversary Edition was added to the Master Chief Collection for PC. And I say technically because it dropped at 11 PM, just barely qualifying as a 12th release date. Well, I started writing this on the 19th, a full week later, which is just enough time to ignore Halo 2 until the Friday, play it all weekend, and hastily make a video about it before getting back to the other project that you tell yourself is more important, and that's what justifies you pouring your soul into it. But are you really? Because you've been putting it off for the past 4 months, and you've binned your other scripts for it, so really, you haven't done any work yet. And if you're not working on it, then you're wasting not only your limited time on this earth, but the very air around you. I'm recording this on July 13th. So let's talk about Halo 2. Halo 2 is the best second game, not just for Halo, but any piece of media ever. That's not exactly the hottest take I've ever had, and it's also probably wrong, but if I'm not making big claims that incite debates, how else am I supposed to drive up the viewer engagement? Let's take a look at the start of Halo 2 and see just how it begins. I'm going to be skipping over the Halo 5 cinematic added in the Anniversary Edition because it's not super relevant, but we're still going to watch the Anniversary Edition cutscenes with upgraded visuals.
That's not the official job title, but it's close enough. And
we fade into a shot of some Covenant cruisers flying past the destroyed Halo ring from the previous game. This is already kind of interesting because Combat Evolved had a similar shot of a UNSC ship drifting through space. This opening shot tells us right away that the Covenant perspective is going to be just as important here as the UNSC perspective was to the first game's narrative. As the cruiser drifts, the camera unveils a massive mushroom or jellyfish-shaped structure. Text fades in to let us know that this is the Covenant Holy City of High Charity. Within the structure, an elite in gold armor regales the events of the first game. The room consists partially of this race of squid men with 3 notable figures in floating chairs at the head of the room, with the other half being silver-garbed elites and this furry bastard. There's a lot to say about all of this, from the fact that 2 of these races aren't present in the first game, to the finer intricacies of their armor dictating roles and rankings in their very complex society. We're just going to gloss over that to take a closer look at what they're talking about.
there was only one chip.
One? Are you sure?
Yes. They called it the Pillar of Autumn.
Why was it not destroyed with the rest of their fleet?
It fled as we set fire to their planet. But I followed with all the ships in my command.
So what we're getting here is the same story from Combat Evolved, but from the captain of the fleet chasing the Pillar of Autumn. Both games have a reference to Reach, which I hadn't noticed at first.
When you first saw Halo, were you blinded by its majesty?
Blinded?
Paralyzed? Dumbstruck?
No.
Yet the humans were able to evade your ships, land on the sacred ring, and desecrate it with their filthy footsteps.
Noble hierarchs. Surely you understand that once the parasite attacked,
There will be order in this council.
You were right to focus your attention on the Flood. But this demon, this Master Chief...
by the time I learned the demon's intent, there was nothing I could do.
Noble prophet of truth, this has gone on long enough. Make an example of this bungler. The council demands it.
I don't have much to say here, except that it's a great recap for people who have played the first game, and it gives new people enough context to understand that there's bad blood between humans and Covenant, while also sprinkling in the existence of a biological nemesis even more concerning than that war. Again, we get some important information here. The middle squid is the noble prophet of truth. They have a council who condemns failure of any kind, so much so that they make examples of those who fail them. We'll see the full extent of this later. Looking back on this next part, it's even more clear the tragic extent of his failings. We're gonna jump the gun a bit and explain that the Covenant believe Halo, the world-sized rings, are some sort of device of ascension. There's a whole religion around it, holding their union of species together. Having the ring be destroyed, as it was at the end of Combat Evolved, would indeed be heresy. Granted, he did try to prevent the destruction, the prophets and the council as a whole clearly do not tolerate failure. No other Halo rings are known of at this point, potentially meaning that they believe their path to ascension is gone, made all the more embarrassing by the fact that he was stopped by a lone human ship and a parasite. The promise to continue his campaign does nothing to reassure the courts. The council had already made up their mind.
You are one of our most treasured instruments. Long have you led your fleet with honor and distinction, but your inability to safeguard Halo was a colossal failure.
It was heresy.
I will continue my campaign against the humans.
No, you will not. Soon the great journey shall begin. But when it does, the weight of your heresy will stay your feet, and you shall be left behind.
As a bit of a tonal shift, we get a quick cutscene of Chief cracking a joke, and you're dumped into the game. We're back in space on a UNSC vessel, same as the first game.
The plating was about to fail. There's viscosity throughout the gel layer. Optics, totally fried. And let's not even talk about the power supply. You know how expensive this gear is, son?
Tell that to the Covenant.
There's an in-universe calibration test where they show off the changes to health, namely the fact that there isn't any. This had to be a big step in FPS games towards regenerating health trope, but I'm okay with it here, as the energy shield regenerating makes more sense than physical wounds, but it's still not fantastic for gameplay reasons. Johnson comes in and gives some sassy comments I take to heart later.
If your shields go down, find some cover, wait for the meter to read fully charged. That, or he can hide behind me.
Before lampshading the fact that he survived the destruction of the first ring.
So, Johnson, when you gonna tell me how you made it back home in one piece?
Sorry, Guns. It's classified.
My ass! Well, you can forget about those adjustments to your A2 scope.
Well, he's in a particularly fine mood.
It's here in the elevator where I first noticed my own shadow. The lighting seems to believe that Chief is in a battle stance, without any rifle in hand to cast the shadow. It looks extremely goofy, and it won't be the last time I bring up technical issues. After a short tram ride where, yeah, Johnson exposits for a bit. Honestly, they do kind of contextualize it, but it's entirely for the player and not for Chief himself. Johnson explains that we're on an orbital defense platform, Kairos Station, and we're above Earth at the moment. He names the two other stations nearby that will become relevant, Malta and Athens, and we end with another cutscene. This whole player section honestly could have been cut, but it gives a moment of calm to get used to the controls before things get insane. So this next cutscene is the one I always think of when I remember the Halo 2 anniversary changes. We get two parallel stories showing the Chief, Johnson, and new character Miranda Keyes receiving awards for their efforts in the previous game. Miranda is accepting the award on behalf of her late father, who was the captain of the Pillar of Autumn. This is all told in tandem with the Covenant side of things. Shots switch between the UNSC celebrating and the elite ship captain from before being tortured in front of a crowd, to the point that he literally gets branded with a red-hot metal object to cement him as a heretic. I'm always weirdly impressed with how good the Admiral looks here. Like, I'm a little bit unsure if they did a good job, but then I see the texture work around his eyes, and it's incredible how good he looks. I'd make a joke about him looking like the reason they call themselves Joes, but I never want to deal with that copyright stuff again. The Kairos station picks up a Covenant fleet warping in, 15 capital ships hovering just outside their station's range. The Admiral gives this line.
Something's not right. The fleet that destroyed Reach was 50 times this size.
Which will come up later, but for now it's explained that the Covenant are going to board the three stations to destroy them from the inside. Chief gives his iconic line.
Master Chief, defend this station.
Yes, sir. I need a weapon.
Right this way.
And we get to combat. I really like that the ships stay outside of the station's range, and they have the tactical wherewithal to board and blow up the stations from the inside before advancing. It explains the big plot point of this mission, why the Covenant are planting bombs on the stations, and it gives a plausible reason to fight them with firearms. It works on a lot of levels, but before we get carried away, I'm going to say now that I'm not going to go through the level frame by frame, dictating every gameplay mechanic present, like I did in my Combat Evolved video. No. Instead, I'm going to be going through the whole game, giving anecdotes about my playthrough specifically, while still bringing up the wonderfully interwoven narratives and how Halo 2 makes small things like keeping flagships outside the firing range tie into both narrative and gameplay, in ways that just make sense. Everything I've shown so far is from the first mission, about the first half hour of the game. I've got a bit more to say about this mission, but be warned that from here on there are going to be spoilers. So the cutscene ends and it loads the mission, right? And it just drops us in. It'd been a really long time since I played Halo 2, but that was jarring. I thought it would have had some sort of theatrics like the first game did. Combat Evolved had a little letterboxing effect for the start of every mission, accompanied usually by either a short cutscene or you being able to look around from the back of a Pelican. A few times, both. Anyways, we get control of Chief and we get our choice of weapons. Really, you're just stuck with the two new ones, the battle rifle and the SMG, which now will prompt you to dual wield. That's another sign of innovation and the willingness to change things going forward. We walk around the corner to the Covenant breaching a doorway, giving Johnson time to set up a stationary turret. Again, some new concepts. I take his advice from earlier and hide behind Johnson while he mows down everything.
Field of fire on that bulkhead. As soon as that door opens, let them have it.
The Cairo station is a neat battleground, both visually and in room layout. The more interesting addition is the clown car landing pods that never seem to run out of enemies. After clearing this room, we get a shot of the Malta station celebrating their successful defense against the Covenant.
Malta, what is your status? Over.
I don't believe it! They're retreating! We won!
This is bad. Real bad.
Uh-oh. Hey, they're leaving the Athens.
Cortana, assessment.
That explosion came from inside the Athens. Same as the Malta. The Covenant must have brought something with them. A bomb.
Then they sure as hell brought one here. Chief, find it.
Cortana informs us that one of the carriers blew straight through the Malta's debris field and was on their way straight to Earth. That's a setup for later. She also tells us that there's a bomb on our station and we need to stop the Covenant from arming it. This all culminates in probably one of the most iconic moments in all of gaming.
Me, inside your head, now.
How much time was left?
You don't want to know.
Cairo, this is an Amberclad. The carrier shield is down. I'm in position and ready for immediate assault.
Negative, Commander. Not against a ship that size. Not on your own.
Sir, permission to leave the station.
For what purpose, Master Chief?
To give the Covenant back their bomb.
Permission granted.
I know what you're thinking, and it's crazy.
So, stay here.
Unfortunately for us both, I like crazy. Just one question. What if you miss?
I won't.
Chief, get inside. Gear up.
We're taking this fight to the surface.
I'm going to take a second here to point out an issue I have with the Halo series. We disagree on what a level is. In my video on Combat Evolved, I made the claim that the first mission was both the section on the Pillar of Autumn and the section where you land on the ring. I was wrong to believe that, I'll admit it. There are two vastly different environments with completely separate goals, with the Pillar being a spaceship and trying to escape the Covenant, and the surface mission being, of course, on the surface, with the goal of regrouping. I'm pointing this out because Halo 2 actually should be combining these next two levels into one. With the exception of the first mission, which is a solo act, and for complicated reasons we'll get into later, the final 4 missions, every single act in Halo 2 is split into 2 missions, which I assume is for pacing reasons. A lot of the time it changes nothing between the two halves. Instead, it just serves as a hard checkpoint after the 15 to 30 minutes of fighting and lets you return without any hassle. Nevertheless, you land in the city of Mombasa on Earth. You're told that one of the prophets, Regret, is on the carrier that landed here. You're on your way to figure out why when this happens. The next 2 missions are you just fighting your way through city streets to intercept the Scarab and blow it up. That's 2 missions? They break it up so that the first bit is regrouping and the second bit is chasing after the Scarab with a Scorpion, which I have a few problems with. Not least of which is that you watch a Scorpion shoot the Scarab later on in this very same mission, and it does nothing. My other problem is that I can't unsee Jello Apocalypse as the second Marine here. He haunts me. So you fight some aliens and blow up the Scarab, and that's all well and good. But the Prophet's ship is about to slip space jump off this planet, which is a huge problem for the city, but we're not there yet. You get on Miranda's ship and you follow them through the portal. This journey is interrupted by another section on High Charity. It's 3 full missions later, so you might have forgotten about the Elite subplot by now, but this is where it goes into full swing. Our punished boy from before, stripped of his gold-plated armor, is dragged to the feet of the Prophets. They regale us with what it means to be the Arbiter, a suicidal role given in times of great peril. It's a position of great honor to which our boy feels inadequate and unworthy of taking up. Nevertheless, it's accept or die.
The Council decided to have you hung by your entrails and your corpse paraded through the city. But ultimately, the terms of your execution are up to me.
Yeah, you could construct your own Halo universe with the amount of world building here. Wait, that's just what writing a universe is. Why don't more people do it? So the Prophets mark a target. This heretic incited rebellions against the Great Journey. He must be silenced, and whose hand more capable than yours? I've avoided confirming it up to this point, but you can probably tell that you play as the Arbiter for this next mission. For anyone unfamiliar with the series, this never happened in the first game. In Combat Evolved, you played as Master Chief for the full runtime. In Halo 2 and 3, you get to play as a split of the two. In ODST and Reach, you play as an ODST rookie and newcomer to the team, Noble 6. It's only in Halo 5, not 4, where they attempt this style of split storytelling again. Although I haven't played Halo 5, so I'll refrain from speaking about it. It's an interesting choice for sure, and I think it works well for a handful of reasons. The first of which being that you only played as Chief in the first game. Throughout the entire story, you were being chased by the Covenant, who were trying to ignite this species-ending construct that they didn't understand. They were the main antagonist until about halfway through when the Flood showed up, and even then they were still a threat. Then we move on to Halo 2 here, and we can see right from the start the dedication to the Covenant angle. What was that experience like from their point of view? We get to know significantly more about this warring faction and how much depth there is to unravel. Back at the start of the Arbiter scene, when the brutes are dragging Thelvadam to the Prophets, one of the brutes suggests that they throw him to the feral jackals locked up and starving. Another brute suggests that they eat him instead. The Covenant is a conglomeration of different species, and they don't often see eye to eye. This particular game explores the relation between the elites, brutes, and prophets. But again, in that very same cutscene, when they're explaining the significance of the Arbiter, they mention the Grunt Rebellion and the taming of the Hunters.
each one created and consumed in times of extraordinary crisis.
The taming of the Hunters, the Grunt Rebellion. Were it not for the Arbiters, the Covenant would have broken long ago.
This universe is alive, and it has history, and there's war, and there's mistrust, and you can tell by the way that Michael Wincott delivers his lines that the Prophet of Truth is cold and calculating.
The universe is full of cold, hard facts, and this is one of them.
He's the kind of dictator that would let his allies die if it furthers his own agenda, but I'm getting ahead of myself. I've been talking a lot, so I'll just let this next cutscene play out. I think it speaks for itself.
When we joined the Covenant, we took an oath.
According to our station, all without exception.
On the blood of our fathers, on the blood of our sons, we swore to uphold the Covenant.
Even to our dying breath.
Those who would break this oath are heretics, worthy of neither pity nor mercy. Even now, they use our Lord's creations to broadcast their lies.
We shall grind them into dust.
And continue our march to glorious salvation. This armor suits you, but it cannot hide that mark.
Nothing ever will. You are the Arbiter, the will of the prophets.
But these are my elites. Their lives matter to me, yours does not.
That makes two of us.
Leader, there is no doubt the storm will strike the facility. We'll be long gone before it arrives. Warriors, prepare for combat.
First, it's dumping us into missions again. Give me that letterboxing back. But never mind that. We're officially playing as the Arbiter, and I've got an issue with how his hands look. Your very first weapon held is the energy sword, and while it did appear in the first game, it wasn't a usable weapon. This is an incredible moment both narratively and gameplay-wise, and it all wraps together again, and his hands! They look good with the sword, but the armor on his left hand kind of bends like rubber if you look the wrong way. Then you pick up other weapons, and how do elite hands work? I spent the whole game trying to discern how they hold things. Best I can tell is that they have 4 fingers in somewhat of a dual crab claw shape, only their pinky finger is kind of an in-between, so it can either work as a claw machine or a regular human hand. I don't think anyone's going to understand what I mean by that, but I need you to know just how much time I spent looking at hands. This also lets me noticing an issue with how the Covenant hold non-Covenant weapons. I imagine they were designed and tested for the Chief Spartan model, so when the Arbiter holds them, sometimes they need to use the Force, and sometimes they just jiggle a bit. It's kinda goofy. So the heretic you're chasing is in this facility hanging above a stormy planet via a single cable. It's extremely sci-fi, and I quite like it, but I can understand why some people might not. I almost want to imagine it underwater, dangling above a cavernous ravine. Now that Serenity will have PTSD, I can bring up the lore connections. The mission itself is kinda boring. You're now the Covenant fighting the Covenant, so how does that work? Well, your team is purely elites and grunts, and their team is purely elites in heretic clothing and jackals. And the Flood are... Wait, the Flood? Yeah, they're here in this Forerunner structure with you. Wait, the Forerunners? Well, I guess anywhere there's Flood, the Sentinels want to eradicate it. They try to hide the elites versus elites combat by just throwing every type of enemy at you, and it's a bit overwhelming. So overwhelming that I forgot to talk about that juicy lore. It's very clearly laid out in the books, and hinted at in Reach, but Spartans weren't designed to fight the Covenant. They were created before humans even met the Covenant, and repurposed in a time of extraordinary crisis. Originally, they were meant to quell insurrectionist groups from the Outer Colonies. You actually explore some of the Outer Colonies in Halo 5, which I haven't played, so we're avoiding that. My point here is that Spartans were used as a tool by the wealthy and powerful to suppress those who sought to endanger the power of the wealthy. The Arbiter, a role taken up in times of great peril, has been commissioned to silence a heretic who preaches about the Great Journey being false, and the Prophet's deception. Just a little food for thought there. So you fight through the gunfire and the Flood, and you reach the heretic.
This will save me from the storm, but you will be consumed.
Arbiter, where is he? thinking Floodbait boxed himself in tight. We'll never break through this.
Then we shall force him out.
So we do the only obvious thing to do, and cut the cable suspending us above that waterlogged, cavernous ravine. The storm has arrived, and he can't escape through it in a Banshee. So despite this sick-ass cutscene with him flying off in one, he really only goes 200 meters to a hangar with a real ship. I hate to say it, but I think that this was all just fan service. And we can see it pretty clearly by once again looking back to Combat Evolved, where in the final mission,
We need to get to the bridge. From there, we can use the captain's neural implants to initiate an open...
we finally catch up to the heretic, where we find out he's best friends with 343 Guilty Spark. He prompts us to probe the probe for the truth about the rings, but this was obviously just a ploy, right? It was all a ruse to get the upper hand and kill us, right? I'll get back to this at the end, but for now he spawns 2 clones to fight you, and you get to guess which one is real on the first attack. Tartarus shows up and steals the Oracle from you in brutal fashion, and the chapter ends. I want to point out that this here was 2 missions as well, and I really don't think it needed to be. Your goal across both missions was to find and kill the heretic. The only change between missions was the introduction of the Flood and the Sentinels. This next cutscene sees us back with Chief and the in amber clad Miranda's ship, after the slip space jump. As they drift along, Cortana reveals to us in sync with the camera, an object on the horizon. I want you to pay attention to everyone's reactions here.
Here we are. Sorry for the quick jump, Sergeant. You in one piece?
I'm good. Chief?
We're fine. Ma'am, there's an object coming into view now.
Cortana, what exactly am I looking at?
That is another Halo.
Say what?
So this is what my father found. I thought Halo was some sort of super weapon.
It is. If activated, this ring will cause destruction on a galactic scale.
I want all the information you've got on the first Halo. Schematic, topography, whatever. I don't care if I have the clearance or not.
Yes, ma'am.
Now more than ever, you need to capture Regret, find out why he came to Earth, and why he jumped to this ring. And that's not explained. At least not in the game that I noticed. Supposedly he knew there was a map on Earth that led to Delta Halo, but I'm not super satisfied with that answer. Reddit also claims Regret wanted the clout for finding the ring, and didn't know humans were on Earth. That would explain why they showed up with a fleet 50 times smaller than the one that destroyed Reach, so I'm a little more satisfied with that. Back to the cutscene. Miranda orders Chief to drop from orbit with a platoon, while Johnson takes a Pelican for support. The cinematic team took the extra time to start Chief and Johnson in drop pods, animate Johnson swapping stations, and this friendly little bro acknowledgement. It's so good. There's also a bit with a jackal and a grunt missing about, and then... God, the mission starts. It gets me every time. Delta Halo. What to say about Delta Halo? It's 2 missions. We know how I feel about those. You specifically drop with ODSTs, not regular Marines, which is a neat touch. There's a really good moment here when they drop a Scorpion for you to use, and have a context-specific dialogue if you ignore it.
You don't want the tank. Okay. I guess we'll leave it for the other. Hold here until the Pelican arrives.
The architecture is incredible. The Prophet giving his sermons in their own language is a neat touch. And speaking of the Prophet, we've just arrived to kill him.
Kill the other.
I have come to kill you.
Honestly, there's not much to say regarding this level. It's memorable, and I quite like it a bit, but it's almost entirely just a shooting gallery. Halo 2 has a weird obsession with boss battles, which never happened in Combat Evolved. Boss battles in FPS games are usually a bit wonky, and I don't think they work well in the Halo games. We saw with the Heretic that he didn't have enough health to be a real fight. We see with Regret here that gimmicks can break the tone of the game, and we'll see later with Tartarus that letting the boss one-shot you isn't exactly balanced. At least he has the same health as all the other brutes. So Chief walks outside, the whole Covenant fleet is here, including High Charity. And then they just start blasting. Chief decides to drown himself, and the chapter ends. In the next cutscene between the Arbiter and the Prophets, Arby walks in on the Prophets decommissioning the elites as their official protectors. Instead, the brutes will take up the mantle. Shipmaster will relay the decision to the Council, who we saw at the start, and as he exits, and Arby enters, they share this little bro nod. I swear, the camaraderie in these cutscenes is what keeps me going in life. The second half of the cutscene speaks for itself.
Politics, how tiresome. Do you know, Arbiter, the elites have threatened to resign, to quit the High Council, because of this exchange of hats?
We have always been your protectors.
These are trying times for all of us.
Even as the humans' annihilation filled us with satisfaction, the loss of one of the sacred rings racked our hearts with grief.
Putting aside our sorrow, we renewed our faith in the prophecy that other rings would be found, and see how our faith has been rewarded.
Halo, its divine wind will rush through the stars, propelling all who are worthy along the path to salvation.
But how to start this process? For ages we searched for one who might unlock the secrets of the rings. An oracle. And with your help, we found it.
With appropriate humility, we plied the oracle with questions, and it, with clarity and grace, has shown us the key.
You will journey to the surface of the ring and retrieve this sacred icon. With it, we shall fulfill our promise.
Salvation for all.
And begin the great journey.
Once the shield is down, we will head straight to the library. I do not wish to keep the Hierarchs waiting. The human that killed the Prophet of Regret. Who was it? Who do you think? The demon is here? Why? Looking for a little payback? Retrieving the icon is my only concern. Of course.
There we go, a fade-in. That wasn't me, they actually gave us a better intro. Still not quite that level that Combat Evolved had, but it's better than dropping us in with nothing. And I know I keep comparing it to Combat Evolved, but games should improve on what came before, and it would be unfair to compare this to future games that hadn't been created yet. Here's another thing tying narrative and gameplay. Much like how I play through the icon, I'm going to be skipping past most of it narratively. Look, it's just a reskin library, but without the Oracle to guide you and exposit stuff. The Flood are here, and the Sentinels are trying to murder everything. Surprise, surprise, it's 2 missions, and it really shouldn't be. Arby meets up with his boy for yet another bomb-ass speech.
This zone is a sacred icon critical to the great journey. I must find it.
We shall cut into the heart of this infestation, retrieve the icon, and burn any flood that stand in our way. The parasite is not to be trifled with. I hope you know what you're doing.
Then he gets our backs again later on.
More humans. They must be after the icon. On your way, Arbiter. I'll deal with these beasts.
I see that coward didn't join you. I'll do what I can to keep the flood off your back.
I know I keep playing out these cutscenes, but the atmosphere and emotion behind them can't exactly be conveyed through words alone. I promise I won't play out this next one, even though it's really good. Miranda and Johnson get the icon, RB knocks them both out, Tartarus shows up to steal the icon, the prophets ordered him to do it, and RB falls deep into a pit of hentai. And so we finally get to see
Contentment. And this one's great journey are the same.
there is so much going on here. Chief and Arbiter are restrained by a Gravemind. The Flood are a hive mind type infestation which all act under the will of a Gravemind. I don't think that's explained in the games, so it's not exactly a great idea to make him a pivotal character here, especially considering the prominent role he plays in the next game. He does need to be introduced here, and it's fine enough, but not enough is conveyed about him. That's all super contradictory, but let me explain. Graveminds absorb biological matter to grow in size, and as they grow, they gain the knowledge of whatever they absorb. As an example, this Gravemind shows us the Oracle of this Halo and the Prophet of Regret. The Oracle speaks of containment and reclaimers, the Prophet speaks of sermons and a great journey. The Gravemind assures us that these are two halves of the same coin. As someone who's played the first game, we all already know this. They're repeating the plot of the first game for a second time in this game alone. As a new player, it's probably spelt out a little more clearly here than anywhere else, but you should already know all of this. Multiple times we've heard about how Halo is a weapon, and Chief even reiterates it right after Gravemind does.
This thing is right. Halo is a weapon. Your prophets are making a big mistake.
What makes this all weirder is the Arbiter side of things. He failed to defend the first ring and was punished severely. Would have been put to death.
Council decided to have you hung by your entrails and your corpse paraded through the city.
But the prophets wanted to stretch out a little more use out of him.
What would you have your Arbiter do?
He went to go quell a heretic preaching that the Great Journey is a lie.
Heretic.
He went to go retrieve the key to ignite the ring and was straight up told by his executioner that the prophets ordered RB betrayed. This is all even more confusing after you consider the terminals you can find across the games. And I thought I was going to bring this up at the end, but they fit so well here. I wasn't looking for them, but I found two of these terminals that tell stories about the heretic and the Oracle's time together. These were added to the anniversary edition of the game, and they weren't in the original 2005 game, but we're going to take a look at how they retroactively ruined some of the parts. This is after the events of the first game, as the heretic knows of the destruction of the first ring, but it's obviously before he's murdered by RB in his first two missions. In these two flashback sequences, they're not contextualized at all, so we're just going to call them flashbacks. In these two flashbacks, we hear the heretic explaining to the Oracle what the Arbiter is. Remember that the Arbiter is a role and not exclusive to our punished boy. The dialogue in this first scene is really good, and it shows off the Oracle's curious personality. The first flashback has the Oracle acknowledging that the Covenant treat Forerunner objects as divine and holy. He then questions if he's considered divine or holy, and states that he would know if he had any such power. It's a fantastic philosophical scene from a robot of all things, showing just how harmful blind belief is.
There are many questions we should have been asking for a long time.
I would be more than happy to answer any such questions, but I have a few more for you. Continue your tale of these Arbiters.
The second flashback is far more relevant here. It has the heretic admitting that he knew Thelvanam, the Arbiter, on a somewhat personal level. Enough so that he trusts RB to hear him out about the false preachings of the prophets, and perhaps he could persuade Arby to convert faith. If he could only just speak with Thelvanam. I actually viscerally hate this scene for a few reasons. First up, it's just another retelling of the first game. That's just silly. I guess it's from yet another point of view, but they don't really capitalize on that. Secondly, the heretic keeps doing the depressingly wrong thing and repeating, "But he's probably dead." I counted 3 times in the first 30 seconds.
The only one I would trust with this information is probably dead right now. But after hearing you tell of the destruction of the ring, I cannot believe that he still lives. Then Vadamir must be dead.
On top of this, he makes the wild claim that Thel is exactly the kind of elite that the prophets would make Arbiter.
In fact, he would be the exact kind of leader the Hierarchs would make Arbiter.
Which turns the whole game into a coincidence. The heretic goes on about how the only hope for the galaxy is for the Arbiter to see the truth and swap causes, and if he only got a chance to speak with Arby, which he did. We're jumping back into it, the decoy scene. Arby chases down the heretic, and rather than start blasting, he asks why the heretic believes what he does.
Who has taught you these lies?
Oracle comes in, and Arby's ready to ask him some questions, but then the heretic starts blasting. Why? I don't get it. This is what you wanted. On top of this, why didn't the Oracle jump at the chance to speak with the Arbiter? He was so curious about the role in the flashbacks. Now he has one in front of him and he's not buzzing with questions? They have a slight chat afterwards before Tartarus yoinks him.
Unfortunate. His edification was most enjoyable.
I had no choice, Holy Oracle. This heretic imperiled the Great Journey.
Oracle, Great Journey. Why do you Mendlers insist on using such inaccurate verbiage?
It's all just so goofy. The story is made worse by the addition of more information. It's the J.K. Rowling effect. So, I strayed wildly from what sparked that rant. The Gravemind and Chief are both telling Arbiter that the Halo rings are galaxy-spanning weapons meant to eradicate life.
This thing is right. Halo is a weapon. Your prophets are making a big mistake.
Arby got betrayed by the prophets after his use ran its course, and yet, even here, he denies what's laid out in front of him.
Your ignorance already destroyed one of the sacred rings, Demon. It shall not harm another.
And I only have one explanation for why. It's in the scene that I just played, and I'll show it again in case you missed it.
Your ignorance already destroyed one of the sacred rings, Demon. It shall not harm another. If you will not hear the truth, then I will show it to you.
When you first saw Halo, were you blinded by its majesty?
Blinded?
Paralyzed? Dumbstruck?
No.
Yet the humans were able to evade your ships, land on the sacred ring, and desecrate it with their filthy footsteps.
Noble Hierarchs, surely you understand that once the Parasite attacked...
There will be order in this council.
You were right to focus your attention on the Flood. But this demon, this Master Chief...
By the time I learned the demon's intent, there was nothing I could do.
Halo's destruction was your error, and you rightly bear the blame. But the Council was overzealous. We know you are no heretic.
The human that killed the Prophet of Regret. Who was it? Who do you think? The demon is here? Why? Looking for a little payback? Retrieving the icon is my only concern.
More humans. They must be after the icon. On your way, Arbiter. I'll deal with these beasts.
Relax. I'd rather not piss this thing off.
Demon.
This thing is right. Halo is a weapon. Your prophets are making a big mistake.
Your ignorance already destroyed one of the sacred rings, Demon. It shall not harm another. If you will.
The Arbiter is now face to face with those responsible for destroying the first ring, the Demon and the Parasite. The two forces that stripped Thel of his fleet and almost cost him his life. He's filled with such hatred and anger. The icon wasn't his only concern. He does still want revenge. It's not the perfect explanation, but it's enough for me to still enjoy this. That mixed with the quips, deliveries, and remastered graphics, it all combines to make one heck of a memorable scene. So the icon, index, or key, whatever you want to call it, that thing needs to be found. The two protagonists, now brothers, are split up to search for it.
Fate had us meet as foes, but this ring will make us brothers.
I don't really understand how the Gravemind can teleport, but I'm just going to accept that so we can move on. Author's note: Goldie Spark is able to teleport Chief in the first game. It stands to reason that the Oracle of this ring would also know that, which means Gravemind should know as well. We see the icon in the hands of the Prophet of Truth. Chief chases after him, and we're fighting our way through High Charity. It's amazing that Gravemind drops us right next to the key on a space station this big, but we're just going to gloss over that. Obviously, we're not going to catch up to the floaty chair boys who don't need to fight their way through the station. Maybe the Arbiter will have better luck intercepting them somewhere else. Rather than chase after, Chief takes a detour to save some captured Marines. Cortana is picking up reports of the Covenant destroying their own ships. A full-scale civil war has broken out between the elites and the brutes. Amberclad does a slip space jump into High Charity. There's flood pouring out of it. We get this cutscene.
Split them up, one in each phantom.
The hopes of all the Covenant rest on your shoulders, Chieftain.
My faith is strong. I will not fail.
Let him be. The great journey waits for no one, brother. Not even you.
Arby hops out of the portal, picks up a plasma rifle off the ground, gets a little exposition from a corpse, and starts slaying. We meet up with Shipmaster and jump back over to High Charity. This is a bit of a continuity issue because we left off at High Charity with Tartarus splitting them up, with one in each phantom. And we're returning here to 3 phantoms just leaving. So Miranda and Tartarus are still on those phantoms, right? Why would we jump back here right after watching them land on the Arbiter's half of things? I get that chronologically they still leave High Charity and land down below. I just don't get why you would jump back and forth like this. I guess then you'd have an issue with finishing Chief's side of things only to swap to Arby just warping in. But that's already the case with you needing to finish the first High Charity mission before playing Arbiters. It's all a little goofy, and it almost feels like these were split up just to give you a change in scenery. These missions are pretty long, so the breaks are more justified here. So Tartarus has the key, Miranda, Johnson, and is heading to go ignite the ring. Why should Chief go after the Prophet of Truth instead? Well, Truth is heading to a big-ass Forerunner ship, and he's going to take the Covenant fleet to go mess up Earth. I don't really get why, but saving the rest of humanity sounds like a pretty good idea. They don't know about Arby stopping Tartarus, so in preparation to handle the ring detonation, Cortana is going to stay behind on High Charity. Similar to how we blew up the Pillar of Autumn to destroy the first ring, Cortana will blow up the Amberclad to destroy this one. So now you're Chief, on High Charity, fighting the Covenant and the Flood, leaving Cortana behind. Chief yeets himself onto the ship, and it heads off to Earth. Arby and Shipmaster have a quick chat, Gravemind gives Arby some words of encouragement,
There is still time to stop the key from turning.
and they head off to go stop Tartarus. You head over to a Scarab, start working your way through a structure to get to the deck of it, and how did Johnson get on the Scarab? How did he escape being trapped on a Phantom? Why wasn't his Phantom brought to the ignition point like Miranda's was? I can kind of understand Johnson not trusting Arby enough to pilot the Scarab instead, but how does he know how to pilot it? After their skirmish, Johnson probably wouldn't trust Arbiter, but he might have also been lucid enough to see Arby betrayed. That, mixed with the elites fighting the brutes, might be enough for Johnson to ask for a little assistance fighting Tartarus. Luckily, your master key works, and you can chase after Tartarus. This cutscene, as they all do, has a lot going on. Let's start with the big issue. Tartarus tries to convince Miranda willingly to place the key in the receptacle. This has a whole bunch of lore behind it, but basically humans are a sort of descendant of Forerunners, so they're the only ones who can activate the rings. That's why the Covenant keeps some human prisoners. But the problem arises when we see Tartarus force Miranda's hand at the end of the cinematic. Why didn't he just do that from the start? I don't have a satisfying explanation for you. It looks cooler this way. Back at the top though, Tartarus hasn't seen Arby since he got sent down to Hentai Haven. Clearly he never watched The Phantom Menace, or really any of the Star Wars movies, because people can survive ominous pits to the center of planets. This next bit is huge. Arbiter up till this point hasn't really accepted that the prophets were wrong about Halo. He hasn't yet accepted what's going on, but he knows who to ask. Tartarus was kind enough to bring the Oracle, the light bulb, with him, and the Arbiter finally gets to hear what he should have long ago.
Go ahead, do your thing. The sacred rings, what are they?
Weapons of last resort, built by the Forerunners to eliminate potential flood hosts, thereby rendering the parasite harmless.
And those who made the rings? What happened to the Forerunners?
After exhausting every other strategic option, my creators activated the rings. They and all additional sentient life in 3 radii of the galactic center died as planned. Would you like to see the relevant data?
Tartarus, the prophets have betrayed us.
We start off facing a wall of brutes. In the cinematic, it was just you and Johnson versus the world. But now you have a legion of elites who are more than willing to throw their lives away at this dude. The fight is... well, it's another boss fight. We've been over this. Look, they teased the energy sword in the first game, but never let you use it. Now it's a wieldable weapon. It's viable against most enemies, but brutes seem especially immune to it. I'm playing on normal difficulty here, and if you don't abuse the AI, Tartarus can 1 or 2 shot you. There's also a narrative hiccup here too. Cortana specifically stayed behind on High Charity to self-destruct the in Amber Clad, in case the ring is activated. Tartarus just activated the ring, and despite Miranda deactivating it fairly quickly, there's still a disturbing amount of charge built up. Obviously, if Cortana did self-destruct there, then Halo 3 would have been a far different story, but that's a video for another time. The rest of the cutscene shows Johnson, Miranda, and Arbiter questioning Tinkerbell about the Ark, and how it's primed for remote activation for the other Halo rings. We cut over to Chief and the Ark approaching Earth. This happens...
We've got a new contact, unknown classification. It isn't one of ours. Take it out.
This is Spartan 117.
Anyone hear me? Over.
Isolate that signal. Master Chief, you mind telling me what you're doing on that ship?
Sir, finishing this fight.
And the game is over. While Combat Evolved certainly left things open for more stories, Halo 2 isn't exactly finished without a sequel. It spends so much time building off what came before and setting up more to come after, it fits snugly in the middle of this trilogy. If we imagine it in a universe where this game flopped and they never got to continue the story, then I wouldn't consider it nearly as good as I think it is now. They set up Tartarus fairly well from the start, and he's definitely a good end to this game, but it relies so much on there being a third game. Combat Evolved could have been the only Halo game, and things would have wrapped up much better than this. A similar example can be found in the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. Curse of the Black Pearl stands on its own, but Dead Man's Chest needs At World's End to wrap up the trilogy. Funny how the quality of the series can be mirrored here as well. I'm not saying one game is better than another. I think narratively, considering the series as a whole, Halo 2 might just be the best one. But I do want to drive home just how reliant it is. On its own, it's not a finished story. It wraps up some threads, but it needs the third game to finish the fight. Halo 2 is an incredible second game, and that's exactly what it set out to be.